Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to the latest episode where we're going to be talking about divination, the observer effect, and a little bit of how I approach divination. And if you're new to this channel, click the subscribe button and click the notification bell. If you are someone who comes on here, a frequent flyer, go ahead and like this video and start commenting. So, I always find divination to be an interesting topic because whether you're using tarot cards or runes or bones or I Ching or whatever it is you use to do a reading, um, there's essentially two purposes behind using divination. The first purpose, the one that's most obvious, is the purpose where you're doing readings in order to get information about a potential outcome. It's not that you're foretelling the future per se, but you're trying to look at the variables involved and trying to understand them and see what is the outcome. Then the other one, and the one that I really play with and is more in my wheelhouse, is actually using divination for enchantment and practical magic work, where you're actually purposely integrating divination into your active magical work. Now, when I do readings, I like to use the Elemental Hexagon deck and also the Alchemy deck, and I actually use these readings in combination with each other. In fact, I do readings for other people, and I typically I do use some of the I do have a couple other decks I use, but typically these are the two decks that I use, and I use them together. And some people would say, dual deck reading, why would you do that? And the answer to that is that I find that it actually makes it really effective for magical work. So, for the most part, if I do readings for other people, I do divinatory readings. I do it for purpose number one, where what I'm doing is I'm helping them get some information. If they want me to integrate some active magical work into it, then I will. But typically, I'm doing it for that. I don't do divination readings for myself or my magical workings, though. Or rather, I use it for purpose number two. So why don't I do divination just for the purpose of getting information for the most part? Well, the reason is pretty simple. In physics, there is this thing known as the observer effect. And the observer effect is basically works along this line. The act of observing an experiment shapes the outcome of the experiment. So basically, if you're going and you're observing something, your observations in and of themselves play a role in how that experiment is shaped. Which really, if you think about it, makes sense. I mean, we don't really live in a truly objective universe. There are certain objective aspects to the universe, but nonetheless, by the nature of being living beings, we can never fully experience those objective things. Instead, we superimpose our own subjective understandings and realities and things like that. Now, we can do the best we can to just observe, but even that active observation brings with it some level of reality alteration, because we're still having an effect on what it is that we're dealing with. So when you think about it from that perspective, it helps you to kind of recognize that the very act of doing a divinatory reading necessarily will have an impact on whatever other magical work or mundane work you're doing, because essentially what you're doing is you are applying the observer effect. And really that's how I see divination. Is that yes, it can get you some great information, and it can. I mean, you can get some great information, you can get some variables, you can get an idea as to potential outcomes. But what you may not be realizing is that it also actually affects and shapes those outcomes. And that for all intents and purposes, what you're doing is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, some people will say, well, you don't have to, you can always do a different reading, or you can just choose not to, you can just choose to redo the reading or change it around or whatever. And yes, you can do that. But all the same, I think that, like, if you're going to do divination for the purposes of getting some information about something, it should be done very judiciously, because the very act of doing the reading in and of itself is shaping the reality that you're going to experience. And I've observed this for both myself and for other people, where I've ended up doing a reading and I found that, yes, events ended up playing out because I did that reading. Because the act of doing that reading essentially set the reality that I was going to experience and encounter. Which is one of the reasons why my approach to divination has changed so much. And instead, I've turned it into an active magical working where every time I do a reading, at least as it pertains to my own life and things, I'm actually using it as a way to manifest a result. And so I toss out any other magical work at that point and just do the divination and use it as the magical working. Because my feeling on it is, why add effort on top of things? As anyone who has gotten to know me over time will basically be able to say that the way that Taylor approaches magic is that I am very minimalistic in a way. Like I can do elaborate rituals and all that stuff, and I have, but I take an approach where it's like if you're doing magical work anyway, why overly complicate it? Why make it more than it has to be? And the answer to that is you really don't need to. So I think that like when I'm doing magical work, my focus is always on if divination is my go-to tool, why not turn it into an active magical working where I actually use it to get the result I want, as opposed to using it as a way to observe whether or not I'll get the result. I suppose too that my approach in this matter is that I don't. Some people, you'll find in like certain books, they'll say, well, before you do a magical working, do divination. And I've never really understood that, because to my mind, it's like if you're already going to do the magical work, then just do it. Don't stress about what the outcome could be. And if you're not willing to live, if you have to do a reading to determine what the outcome's going to be, then maybe you're already doubting yourself and your power. Now, that's going to sound a little harsh for some people who are, and some people will say, well, no, that's not why I do it, Taylor. I do it just because that's what's suggested, and it's a good idea to get a sense, et cetera, et cetera. Fair enough, but let's take a look at the internal dynamics here. Let's actually examine them. In my mind, at least, when it comes to the internal dynamics, it's like, well, why are we doing a reading this way? What is the concern? If we already know that we're doing the reading, why not turn the reading into an active magical work in and of itself and forego the need to do any other magical work? Because the reading can and does have this effect where it truly shapes things and allows you to imprint your own desired reality onto reality. Because reality is a lot more malleable than people think it is. When I had this realization about divination a long time ago, and that's when I changed things. I stopped doing as many divination readings, and I started. And what I observed is that the choice to not do a divination reading for a magical working didn't seem to really affect the outcome one way or another. But if anything, it forced me to just be really certain: do I want to do this magical work? And if I do, am I willing to live with the consequences? Because at the end of the day, that's the reality of what we deal with. It's like, okay, whether it's magical work or mundane work, like once you choose to take an action, you have to live with the consequences. Sometimes those are fun consequences and sometimes they're not. And you just need to know either way, like what it is you're doing or not doing. And so when we consider the observer effect in divination, what we can do is we can simply state the very act of reading, of doing a reading, a divinatory reading, regardless of what system you're doing, in and of itself shapes potential reality and has an impact on whatever it is, whatever the desired outcome is that you're going for. If we understand that and we accept that could very well be a realistic principle, and take everything here I'm sharing here with a lick of salt, like find out for yourself. Like I'm sharing this with you, but test it for yourself. Try doing a magical working without doing a divinatory reading. What happens? What doesn't happen? Do that same working with a divinatory reading. What happens? What doesn't happen? Then do a divinatory reading and treat it as a magical working. What happens? What doesn't happen? Pay attention and find out for yourself. But I share this here because it's a useful exercise, a fun way to test and examine yourself and examine like your magical work and what you're doing and why you're doing it. The thing that you want to keep in mind is that with any kind of magical work, you really are still at the end of the day going to have to deal not just with the result itself, but the consequences, the impact, if you will. And I think that like if we choose to use divination as the path to create the magical working that we want and the result that we want, then what we're really doing is we're actually recognizing that divination can be a very potent form of enchantment work. And I think it can be. I mean, I do readings for myself only on occasion. And the reason I only do them on occasion is because it's about knowing when to apply a tool. And for me, like I'll do divination when I want to influence a specific outcome a certain way and drive things toward a specific conclusion that I would prefer. Now, I want to note I do sometimes, I do on occasion do readings just for the sake of doing the reading, just to get some information. Because I don't want to quote unquote manipulate reality sometimes. Sometimes I just want to get a sense like what is the information here? And that's when I might use divination. I don't do that too much anymore, but I will do it on occasion. And when I do it, it's really around something that is near and dear to me and where I want to get information, but I don't want to manipulate the outcome because of how it might affect other people involved in that situation. But in general, with divinatory readings, at this point, it's just I use them for enchantment purposes. I really don't use them to just I still get information, but then it's about manipulating that information and changing it. And I might flip out some cards for other cards, or I might change the position of cards, or I might do other things along those lines. And I'll do it as a way to basically manifest the desired outcome I'm looking for. Because divination is a great tool for working with space and time. I mean, really, if you think about it, even the act of doing a divinatory reading, you're creating a spread, you're shaping space with that spread, and you're shaping time because of the way that you read it. So why not treat those as a magical act in and of themselves? All right, that's my video for today. I just wanted to share it and share your questions, thoughts, impressions, and ideas in the comments below. And if you want a reading, check out my services because I do divinatory readings. I also do spell work through divination. Thanks and take care.